All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us. This is Left Think Books presents Good Mothers Are Not All the Same. Three St. Louis authors discuss the mothers they write about, featuring authors Lindsay Ellis, Vivian Gibson, and Malika Horn. The books we will be discussing today are Bone Broth by Lindsay Ellis, The Last Children of Mill Creek by Vivian Gibson, and Mother Wit, Exalting Motherhood While Honoring a Great Mother by Malika Horn. Left Bank Books is St. Louis's oldest independent bookstore. We would like to thank all of our supporters, the supporters of Lindsay, Malika, and Vivian, and everyone for their outpouring of love for our bookstore. Left Bank Books offers curbside pickup and delivery to anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world. We just recently reopened our doors, and you can come in and actually browse now, and you will find these three fantastic books on our shelves. We are happy to be able to bring our event series virtual. We believe that events are a way to expand your mind and bring in new thoughts to make the world a better place. We hope that you enjoy this event, and we hope that you support Left Bank Books by purchasing a signed copy for you or for all of your friends at left-bank.com. Purchasing a signed copy of the book from Left Bank Books allows us to keep our bookstore and staff operating, and it allows us to keep this event series going. So thank you for your support. I am Shane Mullen. I'm the events coordinator for Left Bank Books. I help produce our hundreds of other events each year with a fantastic team here in St. Louis. We will be taking questions from you, the audience, at the end of the event. So type your questions as a comment, and you can do that at any point in time throughout the event. And be sure to follow Left Bank Books on Facebook to be notified about all of our fantastic virtual events. Now I will briefly describe the books that we will be talking about, and then I will introduce the authors before they do a brief reading. So I'll do that for each author. So let's start with, we're going to start with Vivian. So about The Last Children of Mill Creek. Vivian Gibson's best-selling memoir of growing up in the 1950s in a segregated St. Louis neighborhood has been hailed by critics as a spare, elegant jewel of a work and a love letter to Gibson's childhood. Vivian Gibson grew up in Mill Creek Valley, a segregated working-class neighborhood of St. Louis that was raised in 1959 to build a highway, an act of racism disguised under urban renewal as progress. A moving memoir of family life at a time very different from the present. The Last Children of Mill Creek chronicles the everyday lived experiences of Gibson's large family, her 7 siblings, her crafty, college-educated mother, and her hardworking father, and the friends, shop owners, church ladies, teachers, and others who made Mill Creek into a warm, tight-knit African-American community. In Gibson's words, this memoir is about survival, as told from the viewpoint of a watchful young girl, a collection of decidedly universal stories that chronicles the extraordinary lives of ordinary people. Winner of a Missouri Humanities Award for Literary Achievement, The Last Children of Mill Creek is an important book for anyone interested in urban development, race, and community history, or for anyone who was once a child. I think we all were. Next up will be Lindsay Ellis about Bone Broth. Set in a struggling suburb of North St. Louis, Bone Broth excavates the social and familial issues that one Black family and their loved ones must navigate in order to survive. After the passing of their volatile patriarch, Justine and her adult children find themselves within one another's daily orbit in trying ways. Justine, the new family matriarch, struggles to connect with her children and refuses to acknowledge the details of her murky past. Raina, the unruly Spitfire social activist, is determined to uncover the truth of that past so that she can move on with her present. Lois, the struggling real estate agent, contends with the reality of white flight while also dealing with the older emotional toll of violently losing her son. And Theo, the public servant, battles with the memory of violence, love lost, and his own sexuality. Through these linked perspectives, Bone Broth delivers the touchstones of an inequitable society, violence, suppression, and the human capacity to continue in the face of extreme adversity. With clear-cutting, biting prose, Ellis explores how trauma affects family dynamics, how it permeates every aspect of life, and how reckoning and reconciliation require the strength and courage to confront all the broken, jagged memories from the past. and about mother wit. The William M. Harvey, psychologist, says this book describes in a vivid and poignant manner the remarkable ability of a mid-20th century Black woman living under conditions of apartheid as practiced in the United States to overcome harsh and even grotesque societal obstacles and succeed in rearing 6 children. That each of them went on to excel in their chosen fields is worthy of serious contemplation. In addition, the reader is provided insight and illumination on still taboo topics such as colorism and intergroup violence that engender and nourish self-hate among many in the African American community. Moreover, the author's penchant for candor is coupled with a constructive theme of hope and faith in the future. And I will introduce each author before their reading, but without further ado, if you would please at home help me in welcoming our fantastic authors for the afternoon. We have Vivian Gibson, Lindsay Ellis, and Malika Horn. Hello. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Hi. I'm so happy to have you here. I'm so happy to have this celebration of motherhood with Mother's Day coming up just next week. This is a perfect opportunity for everyone to buy your books and gift them to their favorite mothers in their life. Vivian, I think you're muted.
Okay. Now,
All
can you
right.
hear me?
Mm-hmm.
I've had some trouble today. I apologize. Before we go too far, I really would like to talk about how we arrived at the name of today's show. Good mothers are not all the same. And it arose out of a conversation, actually the end of a conversation that Malika and I had about our books. And I just offhandedly said, you know what, we should write something about all good mothers not being the same. And that's because she and I wrote about the same place, Mill Creek Valley. We both lived there. We learned after our books were published that we lived just a few blocks from each other. But what was so striking about our book, the difference was that our mothers were so different in how they reared their children. However, I think it's fair to say that Malika and I and all my siblings all turned out just fine. So they were both good mothers, but approached motherhood in very, very different ways. So I'm going to read to you briefly a portion from my book that sort of introduces my mother. Her name was Frances Elizabeth, aristocratic name that suited her. The second syllable of Frances seemed to compel everyone to smile, then pause with expectation when they said her name, Frances. Can you imagine your name always ending with a smile? Frances was the golden child of the 5 Hamilton children, a bit rebellious, athletic, outgoing, creative, and smart. Roles for females were evolving in the mid-1930s, just as Frances was headed off to college. Soon, the controlled freedom of a college campus would open up a new world for her. My father was the grandson of Mississippi slaves and the son of a thrice married and divorced mother who had cleaned white people's homes and cared for their children in 2 states by the time they settled in St. Louis in 1929. They joined the wave of Blacks moving north to escape the tyranny of Southern apartheid and seek a better education for their children. Arriving when he was 14, he attended the newly constructed Vashon High School, built to accommodate the city's fast-growing Black community in Mill Creek. By 1937, when he met my mother, she was on summer break from Talladega College, and he was a truck driver who sang baritone in a quartet on weekends. He was handsome, with a deep, dark, smooth complexion, punctuated with dimples when he smiled, revealing behind his full lips beautiful white teeth that shone like china. But nothing in his early years in the South and little in the crowded cold water row houses of Mill Creek had prepared my father for my mother. She was a 6 foot tall, rail thin college basketball star whose milky white complexion and shock of chestnut brown curls drew all eyes when she entered a room. Her subtle Alabama accent and mischievous smile embodied sophistication and breeding, the likes of which Daddy had never seen. They married in a year and a half and had 8 children in 11 years. Mama's years as a wife and mother in St. Louis bore little resemblance to her early years, but her small town southern bearing was always perceptible beneath the surface of the urban poverty in which she found herself. She was different from most mothers on Bernard Street. They had all traveled from Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, in the Great Migration North during the 1920s and 30s. But to those who knew her before, it was surmised that Mama had left the better life behind. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivian. I'm just so excited to have you here today. It's been great doing events with you over the past year, and I hope that everyone at home knows just how fantastic your book is. And
Thank you.
I gave your book to my mom, and she loved it. So
Thank you,
yeah.
Shay.
All right, so next up, I will introduce, yes, I did want to say that Vivian's work has been produced as part of 50 and 50, Writing Women into Existence at the Billie Holiday Theater in Brooklyn, and published in the St. Louis Anthology, which was out from Belt Publishing in 2019. So I didn't get a chance to read your bio before you started.
Probably gave you too much to read.
Oh, no. All right, well, next up is going to be Lindsay. Lindsay Ellis is a St. Louis-born fiction writer, essayist, and cultural worker. With a BA in English from the University of Missouri-Columbia and an MFA in writing from California College of the Arts in San Francisco, she strives to explore intergenerational trauma, hardship, and struggle. In 2016, she was a recipient of the San Francisco Foundation's Joseph Henry Jackson Literary Award, and in 2018, she received a grant from the Barbara Deming Memorial Fund for Fiction, and Bone Broth is her first novel. So let's welcome Lindsay to the screen. Hi, Lindsay.
Hi, Shane. Thank you for having me. And thank you,
Thank
Vivian and Malika, for inviting me to be a part of this great event. I'm really appreciative of it. And I love hearing you guys' work. You know, I've read your books and I loved like every piece of them. They were definitely page turners, both of them. So I'll just read a little piece from Bone Broth today. By the time they pulled into Justine's driveway, she was ready to call it quits on her and Bev's friendship, if just for a little while. Justine went back into the house with a dark cloud over her. Everything felt wrong, so she ended up doing what she did when she got that down. She read her Bible and smoked a joint, flipped right to some of her favorite passages in Psalms, and rolled up what little she found in Bev's glove compartment when they stopped to get gas. Then Justine listened to some Bill Withers while she took a bath and played dress up in clothes she hadn't worn in years, decades. Stuff she couldn't believe still fit, with smells and textures that hurled old memories at her until she was nothing but a weak, teary mess on her bedroom floor. Justine realized that nothing she'd stolen from funerals, flowers, jewelry, handkerchiefs, could compare with what she rehashed that night. Crucial moments she tried to bury inside of herself or replace completely with other people's crucial moments came back full force with a vengeance. Just thinking about it put her on the verge of imploding. Cut it all off, Justine told Bev. She stared at her best friend through the mirror. Bev put her hand on her hip. Do what? You heard me. Why? Just do it. The shower head's drip seemed like it was getting louder. Muttering to herself, Bev disappeared and returned with a large towel. Thought you just wanted a quick, easy trim, she said, hurling the cloth on the floor around Justine's feet. Took me 6 years to get your hair this long and healthy. Now you want to go do something stupid. You sound scared, Justine said. Bev knelt in front of her on the closed toilet, her slender palms hugging Justine's knees. Justine, I know these past few months have been rough for you. I mean, hair is just hair, but still. Her voice trailed off and her gaze too. Justine got the feeling she was being refused, bargained with. When Wesley died, she said to Bev, all the neighbors came by and they weren't just coming by to offer their condolences. The last thing I wanted was to be smothered in pity, but I found most of them just wanted to meddle, to see all what they thought Wesley left me so they could try and take it. I wanted to tell them so bad, not a damn thing, but it was none of their business, so I didn't open my door for days. Not to you, not to the kids, not to anyone. No one belonged in this house but me and God. We were the only two I could handle or trust or. It was Justine's turn to trail off. She started thinking about things that had nothing to do with Wesley's death, like her kids who'd taken pains to better understand the person she was before any of them were alive or thought of. Things had happened so fast back then. Pruitt-Igoe's demolition in the spring of '72, the displacement of her family and closest friends. At the time, Ma was a wife, a full-time mother, and had spent nearly 2 decades working in produce at the same grocer. And she was made to leave the housing project she called home before it was destroyed, with only a suitcase and the urn filled with Pop's ashes. There was no way she and Justine could or cared to talk about it openly, even when Ma was fully given a new place to live, only 2 years before she died. What were they supposed to say to each other? Gee, remember when that happened? Justine couldn't let it go, not in the way Ma wanted her to. Ma dealt with it her way, as did Wesley and Bev. Justine dealt with it differently. She did what she thought was right at the time. Months after Pruitt-Igoe was destroyed, she joined others in the crusade to unmask and ultimately dethrone the veiled prophet for the sake of winning back the dignity and basic rights of people and herself that she loved. In that moment, she finally recognized how her part in the scheme, as small as it seemed, recovered so much humanity. But the plan backfired. They lost. Case closed. So Justine vowed to give up her days as an undercover freedom fighter. No more secret meetings with the group she forged a strong bond with. No more nothing. In a week's time, Justine had let a man she loved more than life itself knock the will out of her. She dimmed her own spirit, and she learned to like it. Please, Bev, Justine said aloud, don't be one of those meddling folks. Do me this favor just once, simply because I asked. I just want the ends gone, the relaxed part. My roots can stay. Small puddles formed in Bev's eyes. She squeezed Justine's kneecaps. Then give me the damn scissors. I'll do it myself. The shears wound up in Justine's hands and then in her hair. Bev snatched them from her and began snipping until shiny black strands fell around Justine like black feathers. Justine looked at nothing as one hand gripped the other in her lap. When Bev was done, she rose before her legs could freeze and stared at her reflection in the mirror. In the mirror, Bev stood behind Justine and sucked her teeth, hands on her hips. A mess of short, tough, uneven black hair sat like a halo around Justine's face. There she was, or the person she was once becoming. Thanks.
Thank you, Lindsay. I apologize to the audience. There was a little bit of a audio issue during that. But beautiful reading and beautiful, beautiful cover. If people in the audience haven't seen the cover yet and like gotten a chance to get their hands on your book, just absolutely stunning. So, and you came by and signed copies yesterday.
Yes.
So we have signed copies at the store.
Yes. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right. Well, next up is going to be Malika. So, all right. Malika Horn is a founding director of the Executive Leadership Consortium at the University of Missouri St. Louis. She is an academic writer, book author, and journalist, writing extensively on topics from politics, health, social causes to women's issues. Dr. Horn serves on the editorial board of the Journal of Diversity in Higher Education. She is currently a contributing writer for the online publication Arts Today. Recently, she authored the book Mother Wit, Exalting Motherhood While Honoring a Great Mother. She founded and chaired the Chancellor's Cultural Diversity Initiative at UMSL from 2004 to 2011. She created a student radio show, the University Worldview, a diversity program interviewing cultural diversity specialists. Now she has a podcast with the same name as the radio show. Prior to her work in academia, she was managing director of Narcotics Service Council, at the time one of the largest private nonprofit agencies of its kind in the state. She is a board member of several nonprofits in the area. Her hobbies are travel, reading, fashion, health and fitness, and becoming proficient in Spanish. She is married to Prince A. Wells III, professor of music at SIUE. And now, if everyone at home would please help me in welcoming Malika. Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, and thank you, Left Bank Books,
Thank
for
you.
hosting us in observance of next Sunday's Mother's Day. And thank you, Vivian, for inviting me and Lindsay to be a part of this. She is the penultimate promoter, I will say. I want to follow her around to learn how she does all this. And Vivian already mentioned that we both wrote books about growing up in Mill Creek Valley, and think the area around Harris-Stowe State University, if you know where that is, right east of Grand Avenue on Market. But Mill Creek no longer exists. In fact, there's not even a sign that as a marker. Vivian and I went to the same church, Northern Baptist. In fact, her father kept the church in immaculate conditions, what I noted in the book. Yet I don't remember her, and she doesn't remember me. And we're about the same age. I might be a little older. But what an incredible coincidence to read her book and learn so much about our overlapping experiences. Our mother's parenting, as she said, diverged. The parenting style diverged somewhat. Vivian describes her family as more akin to Booker T. Washington's philosophy, the premier African-American leader of the 20th century who stressed entrepreneurship, vocational education, and self-reliance. My mother was more akin to W.E.B. Du Bois, Washington's counterpart, who stressed intellectualism and activism. Another contemporary, and I would say my kindred spirit, as well as my family's kindred spirit, I might confess, is Ida B. Wells Barnett, anti-lynching icon, journalist, activist, and mother. She was married while she was doing all this, and she was speaking all around the world on anti-lynching. Still, our mothers had more in common than differences. And I say most mothers, regardless of ethnicity, national origin, or other cultural differences, have more in common. As I read recently, the mother is the pillar of the home of society, of the nation, and so of humanity itself. And so I would say mothers hold up humanity. Or did Beyonce say, who runs the world? In many respects, we just don't give it enough due, enough recognition. But Black motherhood has a special calling because they must confront and protect their children from the challenges of the scourge of existing race bias, let alone gender bias. Yet all mothers have different experiences and challenges. You have single mothers, you have married mothers, you have women who work full-time or part-time, you have women who are members of the 1%, the one percenters. You have the activists, the immigrants, women in prison, women who are homeless, women who are in the military, women going to college or some other school, women with developmentally challenged children, women with transgender children, since I've been in the news recently, women who are gifted, who have gifted children, and so on and so on and so on. So there is an interconnectedness about motherhood, a multiplicity of shared identities, or as we say nowadays, intersectionality. I do know this. Mothers overcome tremendous obstacles to take care of their children. I would say my mother was obsessed with education. but she saw us in crisis. That is, we were in the midst of Jim Crow. And she believed that education could help empower us and, to an extent, avoid racism sharper edges. Regarding my fellow author of Bone Broth, Lindsay Ellis, what a young talent. What a great writer. She spins a fascinating fictional account of motherhood in post-North St. Louis, post-integration North St. Louis County, post-integration North St. Louis County, which is to say, post-integration is really resegregation. So while Vivian's and my book focus primarily on family life during segregation, Ellis's book is part of the next generation. So I would say these three books are a trilogy. You might want to read all three. Mother Wit, rather, my book contextualizes these lived experiences, and the other books do too. My mother, Floridale Horn, was part of the Great Migration to the North, taught elementary school in Starkville, Mississippi, married, became a homemaker, and a mother of 6 children. And so I'm going to read a short section from chapter 12, Interests Beyond Families. And each chapter starts off with a quote. So I'll read the quote by Sri Satya Sai Baba, who is a holy man who lived in India, who I follow and read his teachings. He says, the educated man should be delighted to serve and not desire to dominate. For service is divine. Service makes life worthwhile. Service is the best way to use one's skills, intelligence, strength, and resources. And so next is 2 little paragraphs I'm going to read. Flora had many interests. When her children were younger, it was much more difficult for her to do much else, as it is with most big families. But even when we started attending school, her participation in the PTA and her making costumes for school programs were indications of her various talents and most likely her desire to do other things. Also telling were her fervent following of baseball. My God, my father and her were baseball fanatics, and other sports. Her political interests and her love of music. When Gwen and I were at Johnson Elementary, she made costumes for us and the entire group of children, about 20. We were performing a dance at a school program held at the auditorium of nearby Vashon High School, which is now Harris Stowe State University, the oldest building there. She made white crepe ballerina-like skirts and white tops with a big clock on the front. The audience loved it. Gwen recalls other performances, including Would You Like to Swing on a Star, I'm a Little Teapot, and Swing on Harvest Moon. Mother played a prominent role behind the scenes at many of these programs. The accolades and applauses were very affirming. Of course, as children, we didn't realize it was an audience full of doting and supportive parents, relatives, and friends who would have wildly applauded anything we did. It was one of those very memorable times that made us feel excited and happy to have our mother so much a part of our school lives. But it also inculcated a positive sense of self and confidence. Thank you.
Thank you. Really, I'm so happy to have you here. I know that our original event with you was postponed and kept getting postponed because of the pandemic, thinking like, we'll do this in person. And
Yeah.
so this is my first time actually getting to meet you and talk to you, and I'm really excited to have you here, and I know the audience is as well. But now I'm going to bring Vivian and Lindsay back on, and you're going to have a little discussion, or maybe a great discussion. It'll be a great discussion, but maybe it'll be like a little bit longer. And so we have about 15 minutes for discussion, and then we will be doing audience Q&A. So audience, be sure to be thinking of questions for the audience Q&A, because I have a lot, but I want to make sure there's plenty of time for everyone in the audience to ask questions.
So let me be first. The last will go first. I want to ask Vivian a question about her book, because in her reading, she ended with saying that her mother left her prior life in the South behind, and it seemed like there was some regret or something about. Could you just go into that a little bit more?
Well, I don't know that there was regret. This is the adult Vivian looking back on my mother's experience. But I opened the book by saying that my mother was born into a prosperous family situation, as prosperous as a Black girl in Alabama could be. Her father was part of that open secret of the South, the people of mixed heritage, of Black and white ancestry, and their family prospered, and he became a farmer, a landowner, and the proprietor of the colored grocery store, which was a significant position in this little small segregated Southern town. All of his daughters went to college. His sons became businessmen like him. And when my mother met my father on a holiday and decided to live her life in the North in poverty, in a different kind of segregation, they were both segregated situations, but the poverty of the North was different and the same. But her parents probably sent her off to school to find a professional husband, not a quartet singer who drove a truck. And to make matters worse, to have 8 children and live in a small 800 square foot house. So I'm thinking that probably was not her dream. But I can tell you, I never got that sense. I never got a sense of regret on her part. If anything, writing this book probably brought up more questions about my mother than were answered. But I can tell you she was a creative artist and fun and a kind of relaxed mother. Very, very different from your mother in terms of, there's this funny story there's something that really did hit home with me that you wrote in your book, and I'm going to paraphrase it. But it was something about the fact that your mother kept you all in your backyard, kept you close. You were very fastidious about the way you dressed and how your house looked. And you said something about children who ripped and ran up and down the street and down the alleys. And I laughed because I said, that was us. We were those children that my mother opened the door and said, don't come back until lunchtime. So it was a kind of an upbringing that allowed us to be creative and resourceful. And I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. But I can't help but think that certainly was not what her parents had planned for her. I hope that answers your question.
Absolutely, you did.
Lindsay, I can ask you a question.
Okay.
Sure.
As Malika said, you were like the next generation after us. Probably Justine in your book was probably our contemporary. And when I read your book, I was really struck by how familiar those women were to me. I attended Vashon High School, and most of my friends lived in Pruitt-Igoe. And Justine and her friend Bev lived in Pruitt-Igoe before moving north. And it was also interesting because I was not living in St. Louis in the 70s. And all of my high school friends, when I got back in the 80s, had moved to North County. So I was very curious to read what you were writing because it was a part of my friend's experience and the St. Louis experience that I had not lived myself. So I have a question about how you came up with those characters. Was there any particular person or group of people that informed how you would write about them?
Yeah, thanks, Vivian. That's a great question. Well, I do want to say, is this being a novel? The first thing I want to say is that the main character, Justine, the mom, the matriarch of the family, she's more of an amalgamation, a mixture of women, Black elders, Black female elders that I grew up with from the church, from school, my mother, my grandmothers. Even though I never met my mom's mom, who died a year before I did, I was fortunate enough to have 4 grandmothers, which was my mom, my dad's mother, my stepfather's mother, who we called mother, and then 2 other grandmothers as well. So just having that, and just, I figured like it's so much to draw from everybody, and everybody has so many different stories that it would be great to put that in, and just kind of have it go over North County, because there was so much going on in North County, right? And I don't think sometimes that history gets told. You mentioned like the next generation. So I feel like, my parents, they moved actually to North County in the 70s, right before I was born. So I'm always given stories about how, white flight actually happened to them, and, and how people just got dispersed in that way. So I figured, this is something definitely that needs to be told, like you and Maleka's story in terms of, living in Mill Creek. I think it's just as important for, all of St. Louis's parts to be told, and, kind of get that idea of the history. So while it might be a fictional story, like the history embedded in that is very much real. And then in terms of Pruitt-Igoe, you mentioned that. I know the people who've lived in Pruitt-Igoe before, and they've all had, just different stories about growing up there, and unfortunately the raising of Pruitt-Igoe. So I feel like that's a huge part of, St. Louis history. Unfortunately, we don't, get to hear it as much because it doesn't leave, a good note. It's always on a sad note, but I think it's very much still part of the story. So it's bittersweet in that way.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And Lindsay, I have a quick question about the sassafras tree. My father loves sassafras tea. And so it seemed like it was a recurring theme throughout your book. First, I was thinking, in one section you wrote about drinking sassafras tea. I said it seemed like a distaste for motherhood. And then then the person across the street cut down the sassafras tree. And then Justine made a broth, bone broth or something. Then I thought maybe it's family healing. So I don't want to give too much away regarding the book, but what was the symbolism, I guess, behind sassafras tree and tea?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for asking it, Maleka. My mother's favorite tea is actually sassafras tea, and it's a huge part. It's a huge part of Midwestern or St. Louis history, and people are like sassafras, but it's huge here. So it's kind of twofold with sassafras, because it's like it is supposed to be healing, but again, I guess I was trying to go with too much of a good thing can be bad, right? With anything. So in that way, without giving too much of the book away, I mean, it winds up not being such a good thing. So I guess that was my point with that. And I just, again, I love, hearing the stories of sassafras. And I think while we get the good side of sassafras, we don't usually get the bad side. So people were like, oh, I didn't know that, and I just thought it'd be a good thing to kind of throw in there, because it is so huge here in St. Louis, sassafras trees and just sassafras tea and the root. So that's kind of where that came from.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
surprised that it had a kind of a toxic,
Oh, yeah.
history of being toxic.
Yeah.
So I'm glad it didn't too much.
Right. Too much of a good thing with anything is never good.
That's right. That's
Yeah,
right.
we have a lot in common, don't we? We have a lot in
Yeah.
common.
Malika,
Yeah.
I have one quick question about you. Of you, and it has to do with why you wanted to tell your mother's story.
Mhm.
What was it that you thought the world needed to know about her?
Well, two things. At the time, I was concerned and disturbed about the demonization of Black mothers at the time. Because it took me 10 years to write the book because I was working at the time and I put it down and take it back up and start writing. And I kept hearing this message about Black mothers don't care about their children's education.
Mm.
And I knew that wasn't true. It wasn't true for my mother. It wasn't true for most Black mothers, or maybe all, I don't know. But I know it wasn't true regarding many Black mothers.
Yes.
And then the other reason is because a friend of mine, who I like to listen really more than talk, and I listened to her for years, and then she finally started learning about my sisters and brothers and my mother, and then she said, "You need to write a book." So I said, "Okay," because I'm already a writer, and I've been a journalist part-time for years, and so I just put my journalistic talent to work to do a book.
Yes. I was so interested in how you and I would sometimes write about the same situation, same people. I mean, I was shocked. I've never read a book that I just dog-eared and talked to as much as this one. I would read your book. I put the wrong book up. I would read your book and I would like yell into the page. I remember the part where you said my father kept the church so pristine. I yelled into the book, "We cleaned that church!"
Yeah, but I had no idea it was your. Somebody was doing a great job.
I know it was me.
Well, that brings up some. I have a question for both of you. So basically, let me get this. So you guys live not too far from each other around the same time, but you didn't know each other until later in life. Did you guys have mutual friends? Did you find out you had mutual friends or family? Or
there were mutual acquaintances, but we found out about it in the book, and that
later
was
got it. Okay.
yelling, "Oh my God!" I would write. There were actual passages I wrote about a woman, an old woman in my church named Mother Vine. She was my grandmother's friend, and in Malika's book, she said, "Oh, and Mother Vine lived across the street." I went, "What? That's where she lived." And then there was another person whom I just idolized. I thought she was the most beautiful, most composed, smartest, most everything to me. And Malika just said, "Yeah, and the Harrisons, they da da da." I went, "Virginia?" And so that's how I learned, by reading her book. But she wrote about them differently. I wrote my book from a child's perspective, and I tried very hard to tell my stories as a child. Malika, as you have witnessed today, is an academic writer and an educator and a PhD. So she wrote in a more analytical way, I think. So you can read both those books and even witness the overlap and still have two very, very different stories about the same place. Hence, we're not all the same. We're not a monolith. And I'm just so happy that the three of us have been able to follow in the footsteps of Zora Neale Hurston, who was one of the first Black women to write about Black mothers and that relationship with a mother and a daughter. And Alice Walker and Toni Morrison all credit her with laying that groundwork. I mean, you have a master's degree in creative writing, so I'm sure you are well aware of the role that Zora Neale Hurston played in exalting Black mothers.
Excellent. Yes.
So we're gonna keep talking. I bet you Shane is chomping at the bit. get us started.
She says we got 4 minutes.
Oh, we got 4 minutes.
Well, while Shane is getting ready, I will say about Zora Neale Hurston, and even though I didn't know you all were writing these books at the time, we're all writing these books, but I think that our kindred spirit is Zora Neale Hurston.
Yes.
Because what I noticed in Vivian's book and your book, and it was intentional with my book, is to tell the truth and not worry about what any other group or even Black people might think, because this was for posterity. This was for the future. I wanted people to understand this era that we were living in and how we were able to survive and I would say thrive in spite of the obstacles.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Part of my motivation for writing my book was in my research, all I read was negative comments about how it was a slum, Mill Creek was a slum, and how there were rats. And it's really funny, whenever I mention rats, if there's some Black person who lived in Mill Creek, they would say, we didn't have rats. Well, there were a lot of rats. I don't know how they decided where they went, but there were a lot of rats. But I just was really negatively impressed by how negative all the depictions of Mill Creek was. But I also noticed that there was never anything written about the people, about who lived there and what our institutions were like, our churches and our schools and our relationship and sense of community. And so I was very happy to be able to add some humanity to the memory of Mill Creek. And hopefully, as Malika said early on, hopefully there'll be some kind of commemoration, some kind of plaque, something that shows that 20,000 Black people lived in a community and we thrived.
Right.
I personally didn't even know that we were segregated as a child. I didn't know anything outside of my few blocks. Malika lived maybe 3 blocks away.
Well, I lived on Garrison, and where did you live?
I lived right off of Leffingwell, so that's like 2 blocks.
Right.
And so in our childhood, your city block was your world. And if you went to a different school, which she did, they went to Johnson School, I went to Lincoln Elementary. So we didn't know each other, but just the overlap of what impressed the two of us that we wrote about in this book shows you how important and how significant our community was.
Right.
And how heartbreaking it was to just have it demolished and just blown to the wind. And we had to work very, very hard to even find our neighbors and try to keep relationships. So I pat all of us on the back for the work we've done to bring these communities to people to read about and to know about.
Quick question before we move on. I'm sorry, but I know Pruitt, I've heard they have reunions, and I'm wondering, does Mill Creek, do you guys have reunions or anything like neighborhood reunions where people get together, or was that a thing before the pandemic? Maybe.
Vivian and I have talked about that. Right.
Okay.
We talked about a proposal in the future, right?
Yeah.
That would be good.
I think some people did years ago. I used to hear about something like that, but I never attended.
No, I never.
And I don't think it was anything very large. It may have been a city block or something like that.
Okay.
But
that's something to do in the future.
Yeah,
for sure.
Definitely.
Certainly is.
I think, Lindsay, you have to realize that at the time, St. Louis had almost 1 million people in the city.
Oh,
so the whole city was bustling. So, and Mill Creek was bustling.
Yes.
And it had big. My sister is a curator at the History Museum, so she knows about the history. But she talks about the People's Finance Building, and which was the first building built by Black people in the country. And then the Argus and the St. Louis American, St. Louis Argus, St. Louis, all the newspapers were there. When civil rights leaders came to St. Louis, they came to Mill Creek because we know about the Ville, which was the other Black community. but most people are not familiar with Mill Creek. And I see Shane here.
Yeah.
I was not chomping at the bit. I was actually I knew this was going to be a great conversation. And I was just enjoying it and letting you all have this incredible conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, I hope we have some questions from the audience.
Yeah.
We do.
Oh, great.
So I want to start with a question. Well, actually, a couple of comments and a question from Christine, who actually had to leave, but I know that Christine will be meeting you, Vivian, for a reading group discussion on this coming Saturday. And I wanted to ask, are Malika and Lindsay, are you going to be doing reading groups similar to what Vivian does? Because like, I know that Vivian has been invited to a lot of reading groups, and it's a really great opportunity for people in St. Louis to really connect with this, like, with these incredible topics that mean so much to the local area. And it's always great to have like an actual author perspective of feedback for their events or for the reading groups. So
Well, I have access to that. If you, Shane or whoever, just let me know who to talk to.
Yeah, likewise.
if you are watching this now or in the future and are interested in having any of these three fantastic authors join your reading group, or as Malika suggested, reading all three together, you could even have like another, like you could have a longer discussion with all three of these fantastic authors as you read their series of books. Yeah.
Yes.
But Christine has a specific question for Vivian because she has not yet read. She bought just today from the event your book, Malika and Lindsay, but she has read and is really excited to meet Vivian. What would you have liked? Vivian, I know you lost your mother at an early age and said you never had a chance to really talk over many things. What would you have liked to ask her if she had lived longer?
I think it has something to do with what we spoke about earlier about regrets. If she had any regrets on her almost deathbed, she said to us that we were, oh God, the best thing that ever happened to her. So maybe she didn't, but I can't imagine a woman as smart as her, but given the time, the era, the status of women in our society, she could have been so much more than oh, I didn't expect it to have a question like that. But I don't know. I just wondered if she had some regrets, personal regrets about her own autonomy and independence. She was an entrepreneur, so I think she worked hard at having a sense of herself and did not live completely through her children, for sure. But I just wondered what she could have been today.
The next question comes from Hidden Timber Books, which is actually your publisher, Lindsay, a great small independent publisher in Minneapolis, or no, Milwaukee.
Hey, Christy.
Wrong M.
Hi, Christy.
Milwaukee.
Christy says, displacement to determination to dignity seems to be a through line for all three of your books. Echoing the quote that Malika shared that says, mothers are the cornerstone then and now. What are some other characteristics you might use to describe these mothers? And let's go ahead and start with you, Lindsay, since this is from your publisher.
I guess I would go in terms of kind of what Vivian was just saying about like if there were any regrets or anything. I would. The first thing that comes to my mind for, all three of these mothers in our books is just sacrifice, so much, just an abundance of sacrifice from all of the mothers. And you don't really, you don't hear them complain about that. I mean, it's just like, well, we, just have to do what we need to do in this day and age. And that's kind of what I took away from it. So that's definitely a lingering characteristic that I would say kind of encompasses all three characters.
Vivian, do you want to go next?
Oh, I don't know. I think certainly strength and creativity. because they had to be creative to make something out of very little, and in some cases out of nothing. And to have that sense of creativity and resourcefulness was apparent for all of those mothers. I mean, the resourcefulness of smoking a joint and reading the Bible at the same time. I think that's. I was hoping to find out who in your family was that person.
You got time? No. Stop.
Oh, Malika, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I think that I'm just going to echo what Vivian and Lindsay have said already. And I'll say that, I don't know if I said in the book, but my mother could squeeze $1 out of 15 cents. That's the first thing. And I learned that from her. She was very savvy financially. And people thought we were better off than we were because she was so resourceful.
Yes.
But I think these mothers were very smart and ambitious. But, you know, like Malcolm Gladwell talks about it's the era you're born into. And they were born into an era where they didn't have a lot of opportunities besides being a mother.
Yes.
And then not having enough support. And without birth control, you're having all these babies. And you got to take care of all of them, and you love them, and you want them to, you know, grow up and do well. But another thing is determination to take care of these children. It takes a long time for humans to grow up. You know, they're not like some of the other animals. You know, they come out of the womb and walking around in a day or two. You know, it takes us longer and longer and longer to mature. So I think they took all that energy and focused it into their families. In another era, they would have been, to me, CEOs of multinational corporations. But they did a great job with what they had.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right. The last question is going to come from me. So St. Louis is so integral to your books, and yet there is, like, your books have reached audiences far outside of St. Louis. And I'm wondering what you consider to be the universality of how St. Louis can be so significant, and yet everyone feels like they can get to know St. Louis and the world through your books.
Well, I think universality is a good way to frame it, because what happened in terms of urban renewal, which is the era that Malika and I write about, and is the era in which Pruitt-Igoe was built, happened throughout the country. Every major center, geographic center in this country had the oldest part of the city, downtown, had turned Black, had evolved into Black people living there. And around the 1940s and 50s, the powers that be decided that that was a valuable part of real estate that they wanted back. And just about every city, there is a freeway going straight through Black communities. So people, if you're in New York, if you're in Cleveland, if you're in Little Rock, Chicago, Detroit, you know that story. So if I'm talking about Jefferson Avenue and Washington and Market Street, the streets don't mean anything. Those streets by different names are in just about every city.
Yeah. And could I add to that, the Secretary Pete Buttigieg is he's head of transportation, Department of Transportation, and they're starting to admit what Vivian has just said, that many of those decisions to build those highways and to displace people and move them to other parts of the city was discriminatory. And it was by design to sort of weaken, like they did, we talked about apartheid earlier, why they would raise a whole township in South Africa and disperse people to keep them weak, politically and economically. And all three of our books, we experienced urban renewal. And hopefully that era is over so that we can begin to as we said earlier about Lindsay's book, to heal, because we can't keep making the same mistakes over and over again and victimizing people, and they have no say-so over what happens to them. We lost our house. We weren't paid substantially enough for the house in Mill Creek. And, we did okay. We landed on our feet. But what about the other people who were not able to do okay? There have been a lot of victims of this particular policy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And then to add to Malika's point too, I mean, not only do you have the displacement and the destabilization of, these whole communities, I think what our works do is they humanize, the communities, because you always hear about stuff like this happening, like Vivian said, in all different areas of the country, even abroad, in South Africa and, other places, but rarely do you hear about the people.
Yes.
You don't hear about like what happened to them, or how it's really getting to the root of the problem, of the issue. And I think it's very important that we humanize people and their families when something like this happens.
Hear, hear.
Thank you. That's great.
Thank you. And I just shared the link. Again, I shared each individual link for your books earlier, but I shared the link for the event that has all of the books available. So if you were watching at home and are just like, I need this book, I need all of these books right now, they're all 3 available on that page. Everyone, actually, I think, Vivian, I think you need to come in and sign more, because I think we might be sold out of signed copies of yours.
Again?
Again, I know.
I'm not surprised.
I'm not either.
Well, thank you, Shane, and thank you, Left Bank Books, because during this pandemic, we've had to promote our books from home. And I have not seen one, just recently was the first time I saw people in person. We all had our shots. But basically, I promoted this book from my kitchen counter. And Left Bank Books has been a tremendous partner in helping me get the word out about this book. So I want to thank you so much for having us here today.
Yeah.
Really
I don't know if people know too, just to brag more on Vivian's book. Her book is like part of a curriculum now. Like who has that? Like it's a school curriculum. It's like I'm just like, wow, like she's on superstar status, and it's just, and she's so chill about it.
Thank you for saying that. But now we have to have all 3 of them. People have to buy all 3 and then do an analysis and compare and contrast our stories. Whoa. Sounds like a plan to me.
Yes.
Book report time. Except the fun kind of book report, like the adult fun book report.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Well, I do want to thank you on behalf of Left Bank Books for doing this event. I want to thank Hidden Timber Books for helping bring this event all together, for the 3 of you, for writing these incredible books, for being so fantastic, and like providing these for the St. Louis community, of which these books are very necessary and needed. So,
Thank you.
And to the audience watching at home, thank you all so much for being here. Be sure to check out our event calendar for upcoming events. We have a lot of really fantastic events planned for May. This is but the first one. So be sure to check out some more events, and we will see you next time.
All right. See
Thank
you, mothers, daughters.
Hey.